The novel opens with Rodion Raskolnikov, a former student living in St. Petersburg, Russia. He is impoverished, isolated, and tormented by his thoughts. Raskolnikov develops a theory that certain individuals, like Napoleon, have the right to commit crimes if it serves a higher purpose, believing himself to be one of these extraordinary people. His intense internal monologues reflect the philosophical and moral dilemmas that will haunt him throughout the novel. Raskolnikov plans and executes the murder of Alyona Ivanovna, a miserly old pawnbroker, to test his theory and relieve his financial struggles. However, his plan goes awry when Alyona's half-sister, Lizaveta, unexpectedly arrives, forcing him to kill her as well. This brutal and impulsive act immediately shatters Raskolnikov's sense of superiority, plunging him into a state of confusion and terror. This crime marks the beginning of Raskolnikov's psychological unraveling. After the murder, Raskolnikov becomes consumed with guilt and paranoia. He isolates himself, feverish and delirious, avoiding contact with others. The weight of his crime begins to crush his psyche, leading to erratic behavior. His interactions with others become increasingly strained and erratic, as he is haunted by the fear of being discovered and by the moral implications of his actions. This descent into madness is symbolic of the novel's exploration of the psychological consequences of guilt. Raskolnikov encounters Marmeladov, a drunken civil servant, and learns about his tragic family situation, including his daughter, Sonya, who has turned to prostitution to support her family. Marmeladov's despair and Sonya's self-sacrifice highlight themes of suffering and redemption, contrasting Raskolnikov's nihilism. Marmeladov's story introduces the idea that true suffering can lead to spiritual salvation, a concept that deeply influences Raskolnikov's eventual path toward redemption. Raskolnikov becomes increasingly drawn to Sonya, who represents moral purity and spiritual faith despite her circumstances. Sonya's religious conviction and compassion stand in stark contrast to Raskolnikov's moral ambiguity, symbolizing the potential for redemption even in the darkest of circumstances. Their relationship becomes a focal point of the novel, with Sonya embodying the possibility of grace and forgiveness, while Raskolnikov battles with his own pride and despair. Porfiry Petrovich, the intelligent and perceptive police investigator, becomes suspicious of Raskolnikov. Porfiry's cat-and-mouse game with Raskolnikov heightens the tension, as Raskolnikov struggles to maintain his composure. Porfiry represents the law and order that Raskolnikov has defied, embodying the inevitability of justice. Porfiry's psychological tactics mirror Raskolnikov's own inner turmoil, gradually breaking down his defenses and forcing him to confront the reality of his crime. Raskolnikov confesses his crime indirectly to various characters, including Sonya, who reacts with compassion rather than condemnation. This confession is a crucial step in his journey towards self-realization, indicating his internal conflict between his intellectual theories and his innate moral conscience. Each confession brings him closer to acknowledging the gravity of his crime, yet he remains resistant to fully accepting responsibility, clinging to his fractured ideology. Sonya gives Raskolnikov a cross, symbolizing the potential for spiritual redemption. This act is laden with symbolism, representing the burden of his sin and the possibility of atonement through suffering. The cross also serves as a tangible connection between Sonya's unwavering faith and Raskolnikov's potential for transformation, despite his deep-seated cynicism. The cross becomes a focal point for the novel's exploration of Christian themes of sin, guilt, and redemption. Two secondary characters, Luzhin and Svidrigailov, serve as foils to Raskolnikov. Luzhin, a self-serving and manipulative man, represents the corrupting influence of power and wealth. Svidrigailov, who is morally depraved and nihilistic, embodies the extreme consequences of living without moral boundaries. Their contrasting paths highlight the various moral pitfalls that Raskolnikov could fall into, underscoring the novel's exploration of ethical and philosophical extremes. Svidrigailov, who has been pursuing Raskolnikov's sister, Dunya, ultimately meets a tragic end, committing suicide after realizing his life is devoid of meaning and redemption. His fate serves as a cautionary tale, illustrating the destructive consequences of a life without moral purpose or human connection. Svidrigailov's demise starkly contrasts with Raskolnikov's potential for redemption, emphasizing the novel's theme of moral choice and the dire consequences of embracing nihilism. As the investigation closes in on him, Raskolnikov experiences a profound internal crisis. He is torn between his desire to assert his theory of the extraordinary man and the overwhelming guilt that haunts him. This internal conflict highlights the novel's exploration of existential themes and the human struggle with moral dilemmas. His mental state deteriorates further as he grapples with the realization that his supposed superiority is a delusion, leading to a breakdown of his carefully Constructed worldview. In a climactic moment, Raskolnikov confesses his crime to the authorities, unable to bear the psychological torment any longer. This confession marks the culmination of his internal battle, where his conscience ultimately prevails over his intellectual arrogance. The act of confession is both a surrender and a release, symbolizing Raskolnikov's first true step towards spiritual healing, as he begins to accept the moral order he once rejected. It represents the first step towards his moral and spiritual redemption. Raskolnikov is tried and sentenced to a Siberian penal colony. His punishment, though severe, is portrayed as a necessary consequence of his crime. The trial and sentence reinforce the novel's themes of justice and retribution, emphasizing that no crime can go unpunished, either by society or by one's own conscience. The harsh reality of his sentence serves as a stark reminder of the inescapability of justice, both human and divine, in Dostoevsky's moral universe. Throughout Raskolnikov's ordeal, Sonya remains steadfastly by his side, embodying unconditional love and forgiveness. Her loyalty and faith offer a stark contrast to Raskolnikov's earlier isolation and despair, symbolizing the redemptive power of human connection and compassion. Sonya's unwavering support becomes the catalyst for Raskolnikov's eventual moral awakening, as her love and sacrifice slowly chip away at his defenses. In Siberia, Raskolnikov undergoes a gradual spiritual awakening. He begins to recognize the moral error of his ways and opens himself to the possibility of redemption. This transformation is symbolized by the novel's recurring imagery of resurrection and rebirth, reflecting Dostoevsky's Christian worldview. His journey in the penal colony marks the beginning of his slow but significant process of spiritual renewal, as he starts to embrace the values he once scorned. The novel concludes with the suggestion that Raskolnikov's redemption is possible but not yet complete. His journey towards atonement is just beginning, indicating that true redemption requires time, suffering, and genuine repentance. Dostoevsky leaves the reader with a sense of hope, illustrating that even the gravest of sins can be forgiven through sincere penitence and spiritual rebirth. The ending leaves readers with a sense of hope, emphasizing the possibility of spiritual renewal despite profound moral failings. If you enjoyed learning about this classic, consider subscribing to see future videos on timeless classics. Happy learning!